Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I always love seeing where the light from this family reaches, how far the warmth of our connection travels. Tonight feels different though. This isn't a song release, not a tour update, not even a reflection about the group. This is just me talking to you as a man who's standing on the edge of something bigger than any award or performance I've ever done. I've been turning this moment over in my head for months, trying to find the right words to say it. But there's no perfect sentence to describe what happens when someone changes the entire rhythm of your heartbeat. I fell in love. Not the kind of love that comes wrapped in headlines or speculation, but the kind that sneaks in quietly when you're not trying to prove anything. The kind that feels like coming home after being away for too long. You know, for most of my life, everything moved fast. I was 16 when everything started to change. When 7 boys stood together and promised to give their all. I grew up under stage lights and camera flashes, surrounded by people who saw me as something I hadn't even understood yet. Fame makes your world big, but it also makes it small in ways people don't talk about. There's a lot of noise, but not always a lot of real conversation. You end up performing even when the music stops. Somewhere along the way, I started confusing the applause for love. It took me years to realize the difference. It took me even longer to be still enough to feel the quiet ache of wanting someone who could see through all of that. It's strange I didn't meet her at an event, or a shoot, or a party. It wasn't one of those cinematic spotlight moments. It happened somewhere normal, almost embarrassingly ordinary. I had gone back to Busan for a few days after finishing some solo work. My mom kept insisting I take time to breathe, and she was right. I was tired, not physically, but inside. The kind of tired you feel when everything looks perfect outside but feels hollow inside. I remember walking into this small community center near my old neighborhood. They were doing a weekend volunteer drive, helping local kids prepare for the new school year. I didn't plan to go, but something about the sound of laughter spilling from inside pulled me in. No cameras, no fans, just life happening, raw and unfiltered. That's where I saw her. She wasn't doing anything extraordinary, just kneeling beside a little boy, tying his shoes because his hands were covered in paint, but there was something in the way she moved, in the way she spoke to the child. Like he was the only person in the world that mattered in that moment. Her focus was pure. Her presence felt like calm in a room full of motion. I don't know what I expected when she turned around, but what hit me wasn't attraction, it was recognition. The kind that doesn't say, I want to know who she is, but I think I've known her forever. Later, someone asked why I was there. And before I could come up with a polished answer, she smiled and said something that stopped me cold. We practice who we want to be by showing up for others. Practice who we want to be. That sentence stayed in my chest long after the event ended. It reminded me of the way we used to train as BTS, how every rehearsal, every take, every mistake wasn't just about perfection, but about becoming. Maybe love is the same way. Not a performance you nail once, but a lifelong rehearsal of learning how to show up for someone else. Over the next few weeks, I kept going back, no big reason, no hidden plan, just to help, to listen, to exist in a place that didn't need the word idol. Sometimes she'd be there painting with the kids, sometimes organizing boxes or cleaning. She never acted like she recognized me, and maybe that's what made me feel safe. It's strange to say, but I think she saw Jungkook the person, not Jungkook the phenomenon. The conversations we had weren't deep at first, mostly jokes about who made the biggest mess or which snacks went missing, but little by little, they grew roots. She told me she was a teacher. That made sense. Everything about her carried this quiet patience, this sense of purpose beyond herself. There was a moment small, almost invisible to anyone else, that changed something in me. We were sorting donated books and found one that had been scribbled all over by a child. She picked it up and said, "This is my favorite kind of book. It's been lived in." I laughed, but then she added, "Perfect things are nice, but they don't teach much. You learn more from the ones with marks and fingerprints." I froze for a second because it felt like she wasn't talking about books at all. She was talking about people. maybe even me. For years, I'd tried to hide every imperfection, every scar, every insecurity under the armor of professionalism. And here she was, reminding me that maybe those marks are where love actually finds its way in. I started to notice how she treated everyone. She remembered people's stories. She laughed with her whole face. She never rushed. There was a depth in her simplicity, a strength that didn't need to announce itself. I'd been around countless brilliant minds, creative souls, powerful leaders. But this quiet consistency felt like a different kind of intelligence. It wasn't about achievement, it was about awareness, about choosing over and over again to be kind when it wasn't convenient. Watching her was like watching the version of myself I still wanted to become. One day, while cleaning brushes, she asked why I kept showing up. I could have said something charming or mysterious, but all that came out was the truth. Because I feel peaceful here. She didn't say anything, just smiled like she understood. It's hard to explain, but that space became something sacred for me. I'd finished long recording sessions, exhaustion sitting heavy on my shoulders, and somehow that little center became the place where I remembered what being human felt like. The noise stopped there, and in that silence, I started to hear myself again. Jimin noticed it first. One night after practice, he looked at me and said, "You're different lately, softer somehow." I laughed it off, but he wasn't wrong. When you've spent years pushing your limits, you forget what gentleness feels like until someone teaches you without even trying. Taehyung joked that I was in my poetic era. RM just smiled knowingly, the way he always does when he sees through you without saying much. Suga said, "Whatever this piece is, keep it." And Jinhyung, ever the older brother, told me, "Don't be afraid of happiness, kid." Even Hobi-hyung, with his light that never dims, started teasing me during dance breaks, humming love songs. Maybe they all saw what I was trying not to name. The more I learned about her, the more I realized it wasn't her perfection that pulled me in. It was her sincerity. She talked about her students with a kind of devotion that made me respect her deeply. She once said, "Every day I get to see who I'm becoming through how I treat others." That echoed the same belief we built as BTS, that growth isn't about applause, it's about impact. I found myself thinking about how she'd fit into the rhythm of my life, or maybe how I could fit into hers. It terrified me, honestly, because love, for me, had always been risky territory, something that lived under scrutiny, something too fragile for public air. But she made it feel sturdy, like love wasn't a secret, it was a practice. There's one night I'll never forget. It was raining, and the event had ended late. We stayed behind to stack chairs and mop the floor. When we stepped outside, the streets were slick and quiet. She offered her umbrella, and we walked in that soft drizzle, side by side, not saying much. The city lights reflected on the puddles like constellations. I caught myself smiling for no reason. When we reached the corner, she said, "You know what I like about the rain? It makes everyone look the same, no one's pretending." And that's when it happened. That's when I knew it wasn't about attraction or timing or destiny. It was about the simple truth that I could be fully myself beside her, and it would still be enough. That's what love felt like. Not a storm, but a steady rain, gentle, cleansing, alive. I think part of me fell for her that night, but another part fell for who I became when I was with her. I was quieter, more patient, less focused on achievement, more aware of presence. It reminded me of the early BTS days, before the fame, when all we had was each other's belief that something beautiful could be built from struggle. Love, I realize, works the same way. It's not about what you have, it's about who you're becoming together. And that's what I want to keep practicing every single day of my life. I didn't expect her to linger in my mind the way a melody does when you can't stop humming it. It was an obsession, it was something quieter, something that sat in the space between thoughts, like a heartbeat you notice only when the room is silent. Every time I left that small community center, I felt like I'd left a piece of calm behind, and when I'd come back, it was waiting for me again. That feeling scared me a little, because for so long, my sense of peace had come from motion, from doing, performing, achieving. But this peace asked for stillness. It asked me to stay. My mom noticed before I said anything. One night, when I came home, she said, "You smile differently these days." I laughed, asked what she meant, and she just said, "Like someone found your missing part." I didn't have an answer, but she wasn't wrong. When you spend your life chasing perfection, you forget what it means to simply be content. My dad, Ever, the quiet one, only nodded. He never asked for details, just patted my shoulder, and I understood that in his silence was approval. The kind of approval that says, if she makes you softer, she's good for you. At the same time, part of me resisted it. Love had always felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. My life wasn't ordinary. It never could be. Every connection came with weight expectations, rumors, invasions. So I tried to reason with myself. You're not ready. You don't have time. You'll only hurt her by existing in public. But the heart doesn't take orders. It moves in its own rhythm. And mine had already started to change. There was one weekend when I almost didn't go back. Schedules were crazy. Recording had stretched late into the night, and the exhaustion was deep in my bones. But something inside whispered, just show up. So I did. She was already there, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, surrounded by a dozen kids painting a mural on the wall. There was music playing one of our old songs, actually, and she was humming along without realizing it. Watching her laugh with those kids felt like watching sunlight learn how to stay. I joined in. No cameras, no managers, just another pair of hands covered in paint. That day we didn't talk much, but I remember thinking, this is what happiness looks like when it doesn't need an audience. A week later, we finally had time to sit and talk after everyone had gone. She asked about the band, not like a fan, but like someone genuinely curious about what it's like to build something with people for so long. I told her how the members aren't just coworkers, they're my brothers. How Jimin is the mirror that reflects honesty even when it's uncomfortable. How Taehyung challenges my comfort zones with his fearless curiosity. How RM carries the weight of words that keep us grounded. How Jinhyung's laughter is still the sound of safety. How Suga's wisdom sneaks up on you when you least expect it. And how Hobi-hyung's optimism holds us together like gravity. She listened quietly, eyes soft, like she could see the whole story in her mind. Then she said something I didn't expect. You're lucky to have built something that teaches you love every day. I frowned, not sure what she meant, and she continued. Friendship that survives fame, that's a kind of love most people never get to experience. That hit me, because she was right. For years, I thought love was something separate from my career, something waiting somewhere else. But maybe it was already around me in every shared laugh, in every argument that ended in understanding. In every stage, we walked off together knowing we gave it all. Love wasn't new. I had just been too busy to notice it. That realization changed how I saw her too. She wasn't arriving to complete me. She was arriving to remind me of everything I'd already learned about love, but had forgotten to apply to myself. Her presence was like a bridge connecting my public world and my private one. With her, I could breathe without performing. I could sit in silence and not feel the need to fill it with words. We talk about small things, how coffee tastes better after a long day, how kids at her school see beauty in the smallest things, how the moon looks loneliest when it's full. These weren't grand cinematic conversations, but they mattered. They were the kind that stitched two lives together slowly, with quiet thread. I started realizing that love doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It seeps in through moments that feel unremarkable at the time. Like her leaving a small note inside a donation box that read, "You are loved," even when nobody says it. Or the way she remembered every person's name after meeting them once. Or how she'd stop to talk to the elderly volunteers as if they were old friends. Every action was a small poem, written without words. Jimin once told me, real love makes you want to be honest, even if it's messy. He was right. I began noticing how much of my life had been curated for perfection. Every appearance, every word, every move filtered through layers of expectation. But with her, I wanted imperfection. I wanted to show her the version of me that forgets lyrics sometimes, that burns midnight ramen, that gets quiet when I'm overwhelmed. And she never tried to fix those parts. She just accepted them, and somehow that acceptance healed pieces of me I didn't realize were still bleeding. I remember telling RM about her one night after a long studio session. He listened, nodded, and said, "It sounds like she teaches you peace." That phrase stayed with me, because that's exactly what she did, not by preaching it, but by living it. Peace wasn't her gift, it was her present. As weeks turned into months, my fear began to shift into gratitude. I still worried about the world's reaction, the endless curiosity, the invasion that always follows affection when you're someone like me. But she never flinched. When I asked if she was scared of the attention, she said, "I'm not scared of what people say about you. I'm scared of you forgetting to live for yourself." That single sentence broke something open inside me. She wasn't trying to protect herself from my world. She was trying to protect me from losing myself in it. One evening, she came to one of our rehearsals. The members were teasing me relentlessly, of course, but she handled it gracefully, laughing with them completely at ease. Later, Jin pulled me aside and whispered, "She fits." That's all he said, and he didn't need to say more. When someone who's seen you at your worst says that, it carries weight. There's this thing that happens when you start loving someone for real. You start remembering who you were before the world taught you to harden. With her, I laughed differently. Louder, freer. I noticed small things again. The smell of rain, the texture of paper, the color of morning light. I wrote songs not because I had deadlines, but because I had feelings that needed somewhere to live. My music became more human again, and so did I. People always talk about the spark when you meet the one, but for me, it wasn't a spark, it was a quiet certainty, like recognizing the melody of a song you haven't heard in years, but somehow still know every word to. That's how she felt. Familiar, grounded, true. There's a night I'll never forget. We were sitting by the Han River after volunteering. It was cold, and she offered me her scarf. We didn't talk much, just sat there, watching the reflections tremble on the water. After a long silence, she said, "Do you ever wonder what kind of person you're becoming?" I looked at her and said, "All the time." She smiled and replied, "Then you're already growing." That moment, under that quiet sky, something shifted. I realized love isn't about finding someone to escape life with. It's about finding someone who makes you want to face it. Since that night, I've carried her words everywhere. They echo when I'm on stage, when I talk to my family, when I sit alone after concerts, drenched in sweat and adrenaline, because in the end, everything we build, every dream we chase only matters if we have someone or some reason that keeps us human through it all. And she became that reason for me. There's something almost cruel about how time starts moving differently once your heart gets involved. The same days that used to drag suddenly feel too short. Every conversation becomes a memory before it's even finished. Every silence feels like a sentence you didn't have time to say. I used to think I understood timing. In music, in performance, timing is everything. You study rhythm, you master it, you control it. But when it comes to love, time refuses to obey. It bends around emotion, stretches between glances, freezes in moments so brief you can barely name them. That's what started happening to me. Every time she looked up, every time she smiled, every time she brushed her hair out of her face while thinking about something, the world just stopped. It wasn't that I saw her as perfect. If anything, she was too real to be perfect. She'd sometimes forget things, spill coffee, trip over her own words. But even those moments felt beautiful because they reminded me that imperfection isn't a flaw, it's proof of being alive. I'd spent years surrounded by people chasing flawlessness, myself included. Every performance, every move, every breath planned down to the millisecond. But with her, I started craving the unscripted. The moments that weren't designed for an audience. The laughter that didn't need to sound pretty. The pauses that didn't need to be filled. One evening, we stayed late again at the center. Most volunteers had already left, and she was cleaning brushes. I remember asking her if she ever got tired of giving so much of herself away. She looked up at me, smiled softly, and said, "It's not giving away if it fills you too." That line hit harder than any lyric I've ever written, because that's what love is, isn't it? Not depletion, but exchange. A cycle of giving that somehow keeps refilling you. When I went home that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there thinking about all the people who had poured into my life, my parents, my brothers in BTS, the staff who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, ARMY who waited hours just to hear us sing. Every single one of them had given me pieces of themselves. And maybe this love was teaching me how to finally give something back. Not through fame or music or success, but through presence, through showing up. There's this memory that always plays in my head when I think about her. It was a quiet Sunday morning, sunlight spilling through the windows, dust floating like tiny golden sparks in the air. We were setting up tables for another event. She was wearing this oversized sweater, sleeves covering half her hands, humming some song I couldn't quite recognize. She was lost in her own world, and I just stood there for a moment watching her. And suddenly, it hit me not as lightning or fire, but as stillness. This is what peace looks like. The kind you can trust, the kind you don't need to chase. Around that time, I started journaling again. I used to write a lot when I was younger, back when I didn't have to filter my thoughts for public eyes. She somehow reawakened that part of me. My entries were messy, raw, but they helped me see how much I'd been starving for quiet. I even told Jimin about it. He laughed and said, "You're finally writing love songs again, just without the melody." Maybe he was right. Each entry was a verse, each memory a chorus. Then came the day that changed everything. It wasn't planned. It wasn't cinematic. We were sitting on the floor, surrounded by empty boxes and leftover markers. There was paint on her hands, ink on mine. We were tired but happy, the kind of tired that feels earned. Out of nowhere, she said, "Do you ever get tired of being seen?" I froze. No one had ever asked me that before. People always wanted to know how it felt to be famous, not how it felt to never be unseen. I took a deep breath and told her the truth, that sometimes it feels like living behind glass, that the hardest part isn't the pressure or the work. It's the constant awareness that every move is watched. She nodded, looked down at her paint-stained hands, and said, "Then I'll be your place to hide." I can't explain the way my chest tightened when she said that. It wasn't romantic in the typical way, it was sacred. Because for the first time in years, I felt safe. Really safe. Like if everything else disappeared, I'd still be okay as long as I could come back to that sentence. After that day, I stopped overthinking it. I stopped asking myself if it was the right time or if I deserved it. I just started living like love wasn't a risk but a practice. I brought her coffee on the mornings. I could texted her photos of sunsets when I was on tour, told her stories about life on the road. She'd always reply with something simple but meaningful. "Did you rest?" Or, "Don't forget to eat something real." It sounds small, but those messages anchored me more than any stage could. There's a night that still replays in my mind like a movie. We were sitting by a window during a thunderstorm. The rain hit hard, lightning cutting through the sky. I remember saying, "You know, storms used to scare me." She looked at me curiously and asked why. "Because they remind me how small I am," I said. She smiled gently and whispered, "That's the best part. Being small means you can still grow." That sentence, so simple, so pure, has lived in my head ever since. It reminded me of something RM once told me. The more you grow, the more you realize how much more there is to learn. Maybe love is just another way of learning, another kind of education. Suga said once that the most dangerous thing for someone like me is to forget that I'm human. He wasn't wrong. There were days I look in the mirror and see the image everyone else built, not the boy my mother raised. But this woman, she saw that boy. She saw Jungkook from Busan, not the global name. She saw the small nervous laugh, the shy pauses, the quiet kindness that fame sometimes buries under expectation. And instead of making me feel like I had to live up to something, she made me feel like I could finally breathe down to the simplest version of myself. Even my music started to change. I'd find myself writing lyrics about ordinary things. Morning light, laughter, warmth, because that's where love lived now. Not in fireworks, but in sunlight through curtains. Not in grand gestures, but in shared stillness. The members noticed a shift. Hobi said, "Your energy feels grounded now." Jinhyung teased, "So you finally found someone who can handle your chaos." RM just nodded, that quiet pride in his eyes. And Taehyung said something that stuck with me. "You always gave love to everyone else. Maybe now it's your turn to receive it." I think that's what this was all along, a lesson in allowing myself to be loved. I used to think vulnerability was weakness, but standing beside her, I realized it's the strongest thing you can offer another person. Letting someone see your uncertainty, your fatigue, your imperfections, and still choosing to stay, that's real courage. One night, as we were leaving the center, she reached for my hand. It wasn't a dramatic moment, it just happened naturally, like it was always meant to. Her fingers were cold, mine were shaking slightly. She looked up and said, "It's okay to rest here." And I did. For the first time in years, I rested. Not because I was tired, but because I was finally home. I don't know if everyone gets a love like this. Maybe it's rare, maybe it's grace. But what I do know is that it found me when I wasn't looking. And that's how I knew it was real. There's a point in every story when you stop asking why and start whispering thank you. I think that's what began happening to me. Gratitude replaced the questions. The fear of losing control turned into the peace of surrender. Loving her wasn't about holding on. It was about learning how to let life happen without forcing it into shape. She never demanded space in my world. She simply filled the silence I didn't realize was empty. Sometimes, when I'd fly back from a show, jet-lagged and hollow from the noise, I'd find her messages waiting. Not long paragraphs, not dramatic confessions, just small, grounding sentences. Did you drink water? Is your heart calm tonight? Simple, but those words did what no applause could. They reminded me I was still human under all the gold lights and digital mirrors. One evening I told her about something I rarely speak of, the loneliness that hides in success. I said how strange it feels to stand in front of thousands of people and still go to bed with an echo instead of a heartbeat beside you. She didn't rush to comfort me. She just listens, her eyes steady, her hand lightly brushing mine, and whispered, "That echo is your heart asking for somewhere to rest." I didn't realize until then that she'd already become that place. My mother met her not long after. I was nervous, more than I had ever been before any concert. Mom had seen me meet presidents, CEOs, legends, but never someone who made me nervous like this. She opened the door, saw her, and within minutes, they were laughing together as if they'd known each other for years. Later that night, when I walked Mom to her car, she said, "That girl sees you the way I used to when you were little without the noise." I think that was her way of giving her blessing. My brother figures the members each reacted differently, as always. Jimin watched the way I talked about her and smiled quietly, that knowing look only he has. Taehyung joked that she must have hidden superpowers to make me stop checking my phone during dinner. RM asked her what kind of books she loved, and they ended up discussing philosophy until everyone else fell asleep. Jin-hyung brought out snacks and said, "If she eats my cooking twice, she's family." Suga didn't say much, just nodded once, which means I approve. And Hobi said the simplest thing of all, "You look lighter." He was right, I felt lighter. The night after that gathering, I couldn't sleep. Not from excitement, but from reflection. I kept thinking about how everything in life, fame, talent, hard work means nothing if you can't share it with someone who makes it feel sacred again. She did that. She turned ordinary moments into altars of meaning. There was a small incident that sealed it for me. We were helping clean up after a kid's event. One of the children accidentally broke a small sculpture they'd been painting. The boy started crying, convinced he'd ruined everything. Before I could step in, she knelt beside him and said, "Do you know why artists love cracks? Because that's where the light gets in." She helped him glue the pieces back together, paint over them. And the final piece looked even more beautiful than before. I watched her and thought, that's how she loves people. She doesn't erase their cracks. She honors them. I realized then that love isn't found in grand gestures. It's in how someone treats small broken things. Over time, her presence began to shape my rhythm. I started waking up earlier just to hear the morning quiet. I began eating slower, walking slower, talking slower. My songs changed too. They became less about achievement and more about gratitude. One night in the studio, I told the producer, I don't want this track to sound perfect. I want it to sound alive. That was her influence echoing through my music. When I told her that, she laughed and said, maybe perfection was never the point. That sentence freed me more than any award ever could. The hardest part was learning to trust happiness. I'd spent so long preparing for disappointment that peace felt foreign. But every time doubt crept in, every whisper that said, you're too busy, too public, too complicated, she met it with a calm I couldn't argue with. Once, after a long tour leg, I told her I was scared that my world would overwhelm hers. She looked at me for a long time and said, then we build a bridge, not a wall. It was such a simple answer, but it dismantled every fear I had. I started noticing how she existed in the world, not loudly, not for recognition, but with purpose. She volunteered, she called her parents every Sunday, she remembered birthdays no one else did. I once asked why she cared so much about small detail. She said, because love hides there. The big moments only happen once in a while, but small kindness, that's daily practice. That word again, practice. It brought me back to her first sentence, the one that started it all. It made me think about how everything meaningful in my life was built through practice, singing, dancing, performing, healing, forgiving. Maybe love, too, needed rehearsal, daily acts of presence until it became second nature. Sometimes I'd sit quietly and think of Army, the millions who have loved me through every transformation, who gave me the chance to find meaning in music. And I'd think about how this love didn't replace that connection. It deepened it. It made me more aware of the humanity inside all of it. Because love like hers teaches you to look at every face, every crowd, and see not fans, but people, each with their own stories of waiting, hoping, and becoming. One evening, as we walked through the city, someone recognized me. Cameras flashed, voices called, and for a moment I felt that old tension return. I turned toward her, ready to apologize for the chaos. But she just smiled, took my hand, and said, "It's okay. I know who you are when the cameras are off." That sentence wrapped around me like armor. It was the reminder I didn't know I needed. In that moment, surrounded by noise, I realized she wasn't a distraction from my life. She was the balance that made it livable. Later that night, when everything quieted down, I asked her what love meant to her. She thought for a while and said, "It's when you stop asking what you're getting and start asking what you're becoming." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her and felt something shift inside me again. That line became a compass, guiding how I saw everything from my relationships to my work to my faith in the future. Because that's what she brought into my life, not just affection, but alignment. She didn't just make me feel loved, she made me feel purposeful again. That's when I knew this wasn't temporary, this wasn't coincidence. This was the kind of love that rewires your entire understanding of what matters. And I promised myself quietly, sitting beside her under the faint streetlights of Seoul, that I would spend the rest of my life practicing that love until I could live it as effortlessly as she did. Sometimes I wonder if love arrives the moment you stop trying to deserve it, because that's what it felt like. For years, I kept thinking I needed to become more disciplined, more patient, more extraordinary, before I could even think about something as sacred as marriage. But with her, there was no performance required. She saw me exactly as I was, between rehearsals, between versions of myself. She never asked me to prove that I could love her. She simply gave me the space to remember that I already knew how. There's a small cafe we used to visit after volunteer mornings, tucked between two narrow streets near the Han River. Nothing fancy, just wooden chairs that creaked when you sat, a bell that rang when someone entered, the smell of roasted beans and rain-damp coats. I'd pull my cap low, trying to blend in, but she never looked nervous or secretive. She just talked to me like I was a normal guy on a normal date. One day, while waiting for our drinks, she noticed my hand trembling slightly. I'd been anxious about the fans outside who might recognize me. She reached across the table, touched my wrist gently, and said, "If we hide, we turn love into something shameful. Let's not do that." That single line disarmed every fear I had. It wasn't rebellion, it was acceptance. She was reminding me that love wasn't something to conceal, it was something to live. As time went on, my family grew close to her. My mom said she felt like a daughter she'd been waiting to meet. My dad admired her patience, said it balanced my impulsiveness. Even my older brother once pulled me aside and said, "You smile with your whole face now. That's new." I think that's how families bless love, not with grand speeches, but with small acknowledgments that something real is happening. I remember one evening when the members and I had finished a long day of filming. Everyone was tired, joking half-heartedly as we packed up. Out of nowhere, Taehyung looked at me and said, "You're quiet tonight." Missing her? I didn't even answer, just laughed. But he nodded like he already knew. Then Suga added, "It's good. It means she lives in your silence now." It sounds poetic, but it was true. Even when she wasn't around, her presence colored everything, the way I moved, the way I spoke, even the way I breathed. That's when I understood that love isn't measured by distance or duration. It's measured by how deeply someone changes your rhythm. Our lives couldn't have been more different. Her world was grounded in simplicity, mine spun in constant motion. She spent her days shaping young minds. I spent mine chasing sound, light, and time. Yet somehow, the contrast became harmony. When I told her about my exhaustion after a world tour, she didn't give me advice or platitudes. She just said, "You don't owe the world your exhaustion. Rest is part of creation too." That sentence shook me. I'd built my entire identity on endurance, on pushing through every wall. She was teaching me that true strength also means knowing when to pause. There's a memory I carry like a photograph. We were walking home after one of her evening classes. The streets were quiet except for a few neon signs flickering in the distance. She told me about one of her students, a little girl, who had trouble speaking up in class. I asked her to draw what she felt instead, she said. And she drew a single candle in a dark room. I asked what she told the girl. She smiled softly. I told her one candle is enough if you protect the flame. Something in me cracked open hearing that, because for so long, I'd been that candle burning fast, exposed to the wind of the world. And for the first time, someone was teaching me how to protect my own light. There were days when we didn't meet my schedule, her classes, the usual chaos, but even then, it never felt like distance. We text small things, small miracles really. A photo of her coffee mug, a short line from a book, a silly doodle. And every time it reminded me that love doesn't live in grand gestures, it thrives in constancy. In the small proof that someone is thinking of you in the middle of an ordinary day. Jimin once said that love, when real, becomes a quiet language between two people. I think he's right. She and I developed that language, one of glances, pauses, laughter that said more than paragraphs could. I started writing songs again just for me, pieces no one else will ever hear. They weren't about fame or legacy, they were about learning how to listen, how to forgive myself for being human. When I told RM about her, he asked, "What does she teach you?" I didn't even have to think. I said, humility. Because that's what love does when it's genuine, it humbles you. It shows you how small you are and how precious that smallness is. It strips away pride until all that's left is gratitude. Sometimes we talk about the future, not in timelines or checklists, but in dreams. She wanted to keep teaching. I wanted to keep making music. But we both wanted the same foundation: to stay kind, to stay curious, to never stop learning how to love. Marriage, she once said, isn't the finish line. It's a daily choice to show up for each other, even when you're tired, even when the world is loud. I think that's when I realized she wasn't just someone I loved, she was someone I could build a life with. I began to picture the kind of home we could create, not a mansion or a retreat, but a space filled with music, laughter, and peace. A place where she could come home to the scent of dinner I tried and probably failed to cook, where we'd dance barefoot in the living room, where the walls would carry the sound of both silence and song. Simple, but sacred. One night, after finishing a concert, I looked out at the sea of purple lights and thought of her. I imagined her among them, not as a fan, but as the quiet center of all the noise, the reason I still had something real to sing about. It struck me then how everything I've ever given to the world, every lyric, every heartbeat was preparing me for this kind of love. Not the kind that consumes, but the kind that completes. I know people will talk, they always do, they'll measure, compare, analyze, but love doesn't survive through opinions, it survives through truth. And the truth is simple. I fell deeply in love with her the moment I realized she didn't need to love Jungkook the star. She loved Jungkook the son, the brother, the man still learning to be gentle. That's the version she chose. And that's the version I want to be for the rest of my life. As I sit here now, looking back at how it all began, the paint-stained hands, the laughter in the rain, the way she looked at the world like it was still worth saving, I realized that the first time I met her wasn't the beginning of a story. It was the continuation of something that had been waiting quietly, patient as dawn, for me to finally be ready. And there's something I've learned about love that I never understood before. It doesn't always arrive with fireworks or violins. Sometimes it comes as silence that doesn't feel empty, as stillness that doesn't feel lonely. That's how it was with her. Every time we were together, the world slowed down enough for me to actually exist inside it. For years, my life was a fast-forward reel. Sound checks, flights, rehearsals, interviews, every day was noise stitched to the next. But with her, even the pauses between words felt like songs. One evening, I was sitting with her in that same little cafe. The rain was whispering outside, tapping gently on the window like it had something important to say. We were sharing a slice of strawberry cake. She picked up her fork, cut the tiniest piece, and said, "It's funny, isn't it? People chase the biggest things in life, but what we remember are always the small things." I asked what she meant. She smiled, eyes tracing the rain. Like how your mom always folds your hoodie before you travel, or how you hum without realizing it when you're thinking. The world loves grand moments, but love hides in the quiet ones. I didn't answer right away. I just watched her, realizing that she was right. My entire career had been built around spectacle, making moments unforgettable for others. But love, real love, doesn't need an audience. It's enough for it to just exist, seen by two people who choose to keep it alive. Not long after that, we took a small trip outside the city, just the two of us. We wanted space to breathe, somewhere without the noise of cameras or schedules. We ended up in a seaside town in Jeju, staying in a tiny guest house with salt on the windows and the sound of waves breaking through the night. On the second morning, I woke up early and went outside. The air was cool, the horizon washed in gold. She came out behind me, hair messy, still half asleep, holding 2 cups of coffee. We didn't talk. We just stood there, watching the tide roll in, and in that quiet, I felt something shift again, a sense that this was the kind of peace I'd been searching for without realizing it. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Promise me you'll never stop finding beauty in simple things." That moment burned itself into my heart because it reminded me that love isn't about possession, it's about permission. Permission to see the world gently again. When I came back to Seoul, everything looked different. The streets, the studios, even the rehearsals. I started noticing details. I'd ignored for years: the smell of rain on concrete, the laughter of staff during breaks, the way Taehyung would hum jazz tunes while waiting for takes. The world hadn't changed. I had. Love had softened my lens. It also reconnected me with gratitude. I found myself calling my parents more often, texting my friends without a reason, thanking the staff who worked late hours. One night, I sat with Jimin and told him about her, really told him not just about who she was, but what she meant. He listened quietly, then said, "You know why this feels different? Because she's not changing you, she's revealing you." That line stuck with me, because he was right. She wasn't trying to mold me into something new. She was reminding me of who I already was before the world demanded I be more. There was another moment, months later, that deepened everything. We were walking through a park during autumn. The ground was covered in gold and crimson leaves, the kind that crunched softly under your feet. I was talking about something: plans, music, deadlines, when she stopped and pointed to an old man sitting on a bench feeding birds. "Look at him," she said softly. "He's teaching them trust." I laughed and asked how. "He shows up every day," she said. "That's how trust is built, by showing up." It hit me again, that word, practice. It had followed us since the first day we met, and now I understood it fully. Love isn't a feeling you protect. It's a discipline you nurture. You keep showing up for them, for yourself, for the life you're building together, even when it's inconvenient, even when the world doesn't slow down for you. Back at the dorm one evening, Jin handed me a bowl of noodles and said, "You seem quieter these days." I told him I had been thinking a lot about what it means to truly commit. He laughed, shaking his head. Commitment isn't scary when it's to the right person. It just feels like coming home. And for the first time, I understood what he meant. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized love doesn't compete with purpose, it deepens it. My art became less about impressing and more about expressing. I didn't need to sing louder, only truer. Even my lyrics changed tone. I stopped writing about perfection and started writing about presence, about noticing, about being here, really here. I told her one night that she reminded me of the ocean, steady, vast, sometimes quiet, sometimes wild, but always honest. She laughed and said, "That makes you the tide." I asked what she meant, and she said, "You keep returning no matter how far you go." That single metaphor felt like a vow. Sometimes I think about all the people who've shaped me, my parents who raised me with discipline and tenderness, my brothers who carried me through every storm, the fans who've loved me without conditions. They each taught me a different language of love. But she taught me how to translate all of them into everyday life. There's a certain peace that comes when you stop searching. Not because you found everything, but because you finally understand what matters. For me, it's this: a shared cup of coffee in the morning, laughter echoing through an empty hall, quiet hands reaching for mine when the world feels too loud. That's enough. And sometimes, when I lie awake at night thinking about everything I've been given, I find myself whispering a small prayer. Not asking for anything, just thanking. Thanking the universe for the day I walked into that community center without knowing my whole life was waiting there. Thanking the woman who showed me that love isn't about being seen, it's about seeing. I don't know what the future will look like, none of us do. But I know this: if it's built with her, it will be honest. And if I can live each day practicing the same gentle awareness she taught me, then I'll have lived well. Because love, at its truest, doesn't just change your heart, it teaches you how to keep it open. Sometimes I think back to that first day, the smell of paint, the laughter of children. The way her words landed like they'd been waiting inside me all along, and I realized it wasn't just a meeting. It was a realignment. The world had been spinning so fast around me for so long that I forgot how to stand still. She reminded me that stillness isn't the absence of progress, it's where meaning grows. Love, for me, used to be something I avoided because I thought it demanded perfection. But now I see it differently. It's not a destination, it's a rhythm, like a song you never stop learning. Some verses are easy, some are complicated, but when the melody is honest, you always find your way back. A few weeks before everything became official, before we decided to build a life together, we sat in her apartment, surrounded by books and half-finished lesson plans. She was preparing for her student's art project, and I was pretending to help, but mostly just watching her. There was something about the way she talked about her students, how she saw potential where others might see trouble. Every kid is a small universe, she said, gluing paper stars onto a cardboard sky. You just have to stay long enough to learn their orbit. I remember thinking that's exactly how she loves people. With patience, with orbit, with gravity. That night, as she cleaned up, she turned to me and asked quietly, "Do you ever worry that the world will change you too much?" I told her the truth that I already worry it has. That fame can blur the edges of who you are until even your reflection feels like a role you're playing. She didn't argue. She just walked over, placed her hands on my face, and said, "Then let me remind you who you are when the noise gets loud." It was such a simple promise, but it became my anchor, because the noise never really goes away. But love, real love, learns how to sing through it. Around that time, I started talking to the members about her more often. We were sitting in the studio one night after a long session, and I told them I was thinking about the future seriously. There was this quiet moment, and then RM said, "You spent your whole life giving the world versions of yourself. Maybe now it's time to build the version that belongs only to you," Suga added. "When the right person comes along, you'll know because she'll make you forget to protect yourself." And Jimin, smiling as always, said softly, "You already know, don't you?" I did. We didn't rush anything. We didn't have to. Everything unfolded like a slow sunrise, one quiet certainty at a time. When I was away on tour, she'd leave me little voice notes, tiny reminders of home, sometimes just her reading lines from a book she loved, sometimes a recording of rain against her window. I'd play them backstage, in airports, in hotel rooms that all smelled the same. And somehow, they made each place feel different. Like no matter where I was, a small piece of peace followed me. There's a story I haven't told anyone until now. One night, I was performing in Los Angeles. It was one of those shows that felt electric. Every song hit harder. Every light seemed brighter. But when it ended and I walked back to the dressing room, everything fell quiet again. That silence, the one that always follows the noise, hit me harder than usual. I sat there, still covered in sweat, and suddenly felt this wave of loneliness crash through me. And then my phone buzzed. It was her. She'd sent a photo of the night sky over Seoul. No words, just that. And somehow, that single picture felt like a hand reaching across an ocean saying, "You're not alone." That was the moment I knew I didn't want to spend another lifetime performing without something or someone to come home to. A few days later, I called her. I didn't say anything poetic or dramatic. I just said, "I miss you." And she replied, "Then build a life where you don't have to." I don't think she realized it then, but that was the sentence that sealed everything for me. When I got back to Korea, I went straight to see her. We met by the Han River again. Same bench, same spot. The sky was heavy with clouds, but the air was warm. I told her everything, how the distance had made me see what truly mattered, how every stage I'd ever stood on felt incomplete without her in the audience, how she had become the calm between every storm I've ever known. She didn't cry. She didn't even speak for a moment. She just leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "You found your rhythm again." That night, I told my mom I was sure. She just smiled, her eyes soft, and said, I knew from the first day you mentioned her. Mothers always know. In the weeks that followed, everything began to align naturally. Not because we planned it perfectly, but because it felt like the universe had been planning it long before we met. We met each other's families, shared stories about childhood, laughed over embarrassing memories. She met the members properly again, and they treated her like one of us, teasing her, protecting her, making her laugh until she cried. Taehyung said, "You know it's real when we don't have to pretend around her." That was true. Around her, everything felt unforced. One night, while I was driving her home, she fell asleep in the passenger seat. The city lights flashed across her face, and I caught myself thinking how strange it is to love someone this deeply. Not because they're perfect, but because their existence makes the world make sense again. I didn't wake her when we arrived. I just sat there, letting the quiet fill the car, realizing that this was the peace I had been chasing my whole life without a name for it. When she opened her eyes, she smiled and said, "You were staring again." I laughed, a little embarrassed, and said, "Just making sure you're real." She leaned closer, whispered, "So are you." There was no music playing, but somehow it felt like the most beautiful song I'd ever heard. People ask me sometimes what kind of woman she is. I never know how to answer fully. She's the kind who doesn't need to outshine the world, she just lights it softly. The kind who teaches without preaching, who forgives without being asked, who believes that kindness isn't a reaction, it's a way of existing. And me? I fell in love not with the idea of her, but with the truth of her, with the quiet courage she carries, the gentle conviction in her voice, the way she looks at life like it's still a miracle. She didn't make me feel like a superstar. She made me feel like a person, and for someone who's lived most of his life behind lights, that's the rarest gift of all. Every time I think of her, I'm reminded that love doesn't save you from life, it prepares you for it. It teaches you to stay when it would be easier to run, to listen when silence hurts, to choose peace even when the world demands noise. That's what she did for me. And maybe that's why I fell so deeply in love from the very first moment, because she wasn't trying to impress me. She was simply living truthfully. And in a world full of performance, that kind of honesty feels like destiny. There are moments when I still can't believe this is my life. Not the fame, not the career, but the quiet parts, the mornings when I wake up and realize that the boy who once only sang about love is now living it. It doesn't feel loud or overwhelming like I once imagined. It feels steady, almost sacred. It's strange how love changes the texture of your days. The same routines suddenly carry meaning. The same sky looks different. Even the loneliness I used to feel on stage has softened into something more like gratitude. One night after rehearsal, I stayed behind in the studio alone. The others had gone home, and I sat there in the dim light, listening to the hum of the speakers cooling down. I started playing a melody on the piano, simple, repetitive, the kind that comes from instinct rather than intention. It was soft, almost like a lullaby. I didn't plan to write anything that night, but then words started forming quietly in my mind. You saw the boy behind the noise. You taught him how to breathe again. I don't know if that will ever become a song. Maybe it already is. Maybe she's the song. I sent her a small voice recording of that melody the next morning. She replied, "It sounds like peace, learning how to move." I just sat there, staring at her message, wondering how someone could describe something so beautifully with so few words. That's what she does. She translates emotions into language, so gentle, it almost feels like prayer. A few weeks later, we were walking through the city at night. The air was cold enough for our breaths to show. People were rushing past us, lost in their own worlds. I was wearing a cap, trying to keep a low profile, but she never let the fear of being seen dictate how we existed. She just slipped her hand into mine and said, "Let's walk slow." We passed a flower shop closing for the night, and she stopped to look at a single white lily in the window. "Do you know what lilies mean?" she asked. I shook my head. "Purity," she said, "but not the perfect kind, the kind that's been through the dirt and still blooms." I looked at her then and thought, that's you. Every day with her feels like a quiet conversation with something divine. She doesn't talk about faith much, but she lives it in the way she forgives easily, in how she thanks the world even when it hurts, in how she shows up for people who can't give her anything back. And maybe that's why I fell so deeply the first time we met, because she didn't just believe in love, she practiced it. Even before she knew me, she was already loving the world in small, unnoticeable ways. I remember telling Jimin once that she makes me feel like a better version of myself. He smiled and said, "That's what love is supposed to do. It's not about completing you, it's about reminding you that you were already whole." And maybe that's what she did. She didn't fix me, she reflected me. She made me see the parts of myself I'd buried under years of ambition and self-doubt. I used to think that if I ever got married, it would have to be this grand public event, a fairy tale ending the world could celebrate. But now, I just want something simple, maybe an outdoor ceremony, maybe just family and the people who've seen me grow from the inside. No fireworks, no noise, just truth. I told her that once, and she said, "I'd rather marry you in silence than celebrate you in noise." That's when I knew we wanted the same kind of life. Not loud, not perfect, but true. I've had people ask how it feels to fall in love when the whole world is watching. Honestly, it's both terrifying and humbling. You carry a kind of responsibility not to please them, but to protect what's real. Love, when it's genuine, doesn't need validation from anyone else. It's not a performance. It's a practice of patience, trust, and quiet consistency. Sometimes she comes to my shows. She doesn't sit in front, doesn't make herself visible, but I always know where she is. There's a stillness in the crowd where she stands, like the air around her remembers who I am. After one concert, when I finally found her backstage, she just looked at me and said, "You looked like yourself out there tonight. Not, you were amazing. Not, you sang perfectly. Just yourself." That's what she gives me the freedom to just be. One evening, I took her to meet the guys again. We were all at a small barbecue place in Itaewon, the kind that smells like charcoal and laughter. She fit in like she'd always been part of our story. Suga was teasing me about my grilling skills, Jinhyung was making everyone laugh, and she just sat there smiling, adding warmth to the chaos. RM later told me, "She doesn't interrupt your light, she amplifies it." I couldn't have said it better. After dinner, as we walked outside, she said, "They love you so much." I smiled and said, "Yeah, they're my family." Then she said, and they love you enough to let you grow." I didn't understand what she meant at first, but later that night, I did. Because love isn't about possession, it's about permission. The members, my family, even Army, they've all given me permission to grow, to evolve, to love, honestly. And she became the mirror reflecting that permission back to me. Sometimes I wonder what she saw in me that day at the center. I wasn't trying to be impressive. I was just tired and curious. Maybe she saw what I couldn't see then, a man still searching for peace. And maybe love starts there, not when you find someone perfect, but when someone decides to stay while you learn how to be. We talk about the future sometimes, quietly, without pressure. She says she doesn't care where we live, as long as it's a place that feels alive. I tell her I want a garden, somewhere I can grow things that take time, like trust, like faith, like love, that doesn't fade when the spotlight moves. She laughs and says, "Then let's plant everything we can't buy." There's something holy in that thought. A love you nurture, not consume. A life you build, not chase. That's what she's given me a chance to live, not as Jungkook the artist, but as Jungkook the man who finally understands that gentleness isn't weakness. It's strength in its purest form. And if anyone asks me now why I fell so deeply in love the first time we met, I tell them this. Because she reminded me that the most extraordinary thing in life is to love someone ordinary with your whole heart and to be loved back the same way. As the days moved closer to what people call the big moment, I started realizing that love isn't measured by milestones. It's measured by presence. how fully you're here when someone reaches for your hand, how quietly you listen when they talk about things that don't make headlines. I used to think commitment meant promises carved in stone, but now I understand it's the softer, daily ones, the promise to notice, to stay kind, to forgive faster, to keep choosing each other when life gets loud. One morning, I woke up before dawn. The city was still half asleep, a few lights flickering in distant windows. I made coffee and stood by the window watching the world wake up, and suddenly I missed her voice. I sent her a short message. "I wish you were here," she replied a few minutes later. "I already am." I smiled, realizing what she meant. When love is real, it doesn't wait for distance to close, it finds its way into everything. That day, I drove to my parents' house. My mom was in the kitchen,